We're going to start with Team One. They are from Adelaide, Australia, and they are called Data Dudes. And Jaden, are you on the line and ready to go?
Hi, we're Team Data Dudes from Australia. I'm Jaden Mayola, and I'm presenting for my teammates Gautam Das and Ashfu. Our problem. The severity of future carbon emissions are not understood by the general public as the big picture is not always seen. Carbon dioxide that is released from various industries gets trapped in our atmosphere, causing global warming, which makes the impacts of climate change persistent. Most people do not understand how impactful these carbon emissions are because they don't actually get to see the great rate at which they're increasing. A key part in the underestimation of climate risk is also due to most people not having experiencing any consequences so far. As a result, of these people not having experienced these climate consequences, for many, these events seem unlikely to happen, and the severity of current and future emissions are not apparent. Realizing this, we have decided to analyze some data from countries and sectors so that we can predict future emissions and make sure the public sees a bigger picture. Our selected data set. We've selected the EDGAR carbon emission data set, which has data from 1970 to 2018. This is based on around 210 countries and each sector that the carbon was generated from. And we chose this as it was easy to clean and refine as it's for a specific emission. And by utilizing this information, we would best solve our problem. Our solution concept. Using the chosen dataset, we intend to make models that show the predicted carbon emissions until 2050. Our solution is to create time series forecasting models for each continent to predict future carbon emissions. In doing this, future carbon emissions can be visualized and turned into various forms of advocacy media, thus making them better understood. A key part of our problem is that future consequences cannot be imagined or understood without any direct effect. For many, the problem does not exist until the consequences become apparent to them. This solution can directly correlate the consequences of carbon emissions to a time frame, inspiring a realization that climate action must happen now by giving these threats a deadline. Using this solution, the impact of future threats become real and apparent things rather than disconnected events that seem impossible. To achieve this solution, a series of predictive models would be made in Python, specifically utilizing external Python libraries such as pandas, NumPy, stats models. These predictive models will use an ARMA, which is an autoregressive integrated moving average, as their basis to forecast new data points. Once these new data points have been forecasted, they can be exported and made into visuals and other forms of media that can advocate against climate change. To firstly process the EDGAR dataset that we used, a Python script was made to sort the CSV into different country groups and to put the emission data into columns. After our initial processing, the data was split into 6 different datasets using Excel, each representing a continent, and we added a new row that summed the total of all carbon emissions from each sector for the year. Our outcome to this solution can pose limitations though. Using this ARMA model, the assumption is made that the mean and variance of the data do not change over time, and it also assumes that recent events have higher precedence than past events, and that past information dictates future behavior, which may not be accurate if sudden changes occur. Our impact of the solution. By implementing our solution to the public, we will help provide a way to more easily understand the severity of future climate consequences. We will help describe to the public that climate action must happen now, and will create a means to motivate climate action in people who underrate the risk. Using our solution to create new advocacy stacks, a more effective type of climate media can be defined, being more efficient and educating on explaining the effects of carbon emissions and why we must reduce them. Implementing this solution will allow for a great impact in the molding of the audience of the nonchalant, people from around the world who do not care or understand about the upcoming consequences climate change will ensue. Another notable benefit is that with this enabling of climate advocacy media, an immense audience can be reached due to the many different mediums that these types of media that are possible. This helps to further spread the individuals who get exposed to the media with platforms such as social media, advertisements, and television, all being able to further spread the purpose of inspiring climate action. Our solution has the potential to impact countries on both a global scale and a local scale, having a different prediction for each continent, granting the possibility to inspire action of people by looking at their climate risks that will directly affect them. Due to such a largely affected audience, there is a chance for unintended consequences. So, although we do not believe our predictions to be completely inaccurate, it should be noticed that to interpret a prediction on such a scale as ground truth when there are many different ever-changing factors that can be evolved can be a risk for some. Although most likely not novel in all aspects, our solution proposes a chance to create a more unique and effective type of media, detailing concerns of specific impacts and relating them to future dates. Our findings and analysis. Our model predicted an unnerving rise in carbon emissions from 2019 to 2015, with the endpoint of 2050 reaching over 41,000 metric tons of carbon emissions in Asia alone. In the below presented data predictions, a strong growth in carbon emissions is evident, and in this seen future growth, some continents nearly double their total carbon emissions, while other continents hastily increase at an unsettling rate. In validating our model's accuracy, we deemed it to be sufficient after comparing results with true data, inspecting the model diagnostics, and checking the model's mean squared error. The concept user finding, and this is sort of a concept of what we are trying to enable and trying to make created with our solution. It's sort of directly appeals to the sense of a threat that climate change is going to happen and will pose a risk to you, although this is just a broad concept right here. Our implementation plan. Further implementation will include around 3 key steps: the model tuning, creating a more accurate and effective model to better predict data; the media creation, effectively using predicted data to solve our problem by creating user-friendly media that makes the upcoming risks of climate change apparent and not seem improbable; and media spread, publicizing created media to spread awareness to the target audience, consequently inspiring action. Implementation of this solution is quite time viable, with main time considerations being into the model tuning itself. With all 3 steps looked into, such a solution can be most likely implemented within months. Resource-wise, an investment into the creation and spread of the media would have to be considered, although resource use would be minimal. To summarize, to conclude, we believe that the general public must realize the future impacts of carbon emissions and the rates at which they're increasing for action to truly happen. Our solution was making a model that predicts data to show these rates of future years compared to the previous years, with this model providing the opportunity for climate action media to be created. Using the predicted data, this media would be able to correlate future climate events and disasters to specific time points, creating a much more effective method of climate protest and making the threat of and reality of climate change become more apparent. In the real world, we suggest that this model can enable such media to be available to the public so that possible action can be taken. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jayden. Much appreciate you speaking on behalf of the team. I wanted to open this up to the judges. Should you have any questions? Okay, we've got a question from Judge David Pogue, and he said, nicely done. Can you tell us about the data set you used?
So this data set had the data on the carbon emissions from a variety of different sectors, such as buildings, power industries, et cetera, et cetera. So what we did is that each individual country around, as I said before, 270 had these carbon emissions from the year 1970 to 2018. We got the total from that 1970 to 2018 of each country, and then we merged this into a single data set for continents. So we had 6 different continental data sets, including Antarctica, where we merged all the already merged years of the countries together.
Okay, thank you. So the next question says, great presentation and analysis. The greatest rise in emissions will come from areas such as Asia and Africa, continents that historically have had lower contribution to the global stock of CO2 emissions. How would your advocacy plan help address that issue of perceived unfairness?
Well, that's an interesting point. We have made these 6 different continents, noting that we can use these sort of different data sets to appeal to different continents directly on a local scale rather than just group the whole world together, because making these sort of things apparent that different continents do create different carbon emissions, and that's due to things like population, that can really directly, I don't know how to word it, that can sort of struggling in this one, I'm sorry.
That's okay. We can come back to that. Should anything come to mind. But
Yeah.
the next question we had was, I see how you predict greenhouse gases emissions, but it isn't clear to me how you predict the future events. Please clarify.
Um, so I'm using a method, well, not really a method, but something called time series forecasting. So this is taking past data, which we have in the EDGACO dataset from 2018 to 2019, 1970 to 2018, sorry. And I'm taking this data, putting it through an ARIMA, which is a type of model, a type of linear regression model, which can predict future events based on that past data with, three key components being seasonality, trend, and noise. So then putting it in this model, putting these past data points in the model, it spits out sort of for the new year, I put in the predicted carbon emissions based on the past data.
Okay. We're up for time for Q&A, but thank you, Jaden. Much appreciate again you combing through all of this data and presenting on behalf of your team.